Welcome to another episode of Garage Growth, and this is the podcast where we explore the transformative power of entrepreneurship and innovation, and we look at the movement shakers within this space. I'm your host, Brian, and today we are joined by Matias, the CEO and founder of Kuorum, a pioneering company in secure online voting. And Matias is here today to shed some light on how digital identity and telematic voting are kind of redefining the democratic process. So to kind of get things started, I'd just like to give you the floor, Matias, to just introduce yourself. Give us a brief intro of who's Matias and kind of what sparked your initial entrepreneurship journey.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure. I studied mechanical engineering in Barcelona. I was born in Alicante, which is in the southeast region of Spain, but I moved to Barcelona to do my studies in mechanical engineering. And then I spent 2 years abroad, 2 years in Germany, and one more year in Zurich, where I did my master's thesis. Then I came back to Madrid, where I worked for a German utility, E.ON. I'm sure you know that. And I'm also father to a lovely cat who is switching on and off my camera. So if there's any incident, we can continue. And then I came back to Spain, where I worked for E.ON. A constant in my career is that I've always been passionate about solving social problems through technology. So one of the most interesting problems I found is climate change. So I specialized in renewable energies. And I became deputy engineering manager of a concentrated solar power plant. I was very excited about that technology because, it's this technology where you have huge mirrors concentrating thermal solar power to a tube. Then you run oil through that tube and you get it heat it up to 400 degrees, and then you exchange heat with a regular steam turbine system. So the cool thing about that technology was that you could storage solar energy and produce solar energy during the night. I was very excited about this technology. The problem was that in 2015, prices of photovoltaics went down suddenly, and then concentrated solar power, the technology I was working with for the last for 5 years, became like the ugly dog in renewable energies. So I needed to switch. I needed to move forward in my career, and at that time, I was also doing distance studies at the London School of Economics. I was doing a master's degree in economics, which I never finished, by the way. And I found very interesting the lecture on development management. And there was this idea by Nobel laureate Matias Nso Roca that says democracy is the precondition for economic development of nations, rather than economic development being the basis for democratic transitions in developing countries. And I've always found this challenge of democratizing countries, democratizing societies very interesting. So we started with my business partners. It was first not a business, but an activist initiative. It started as an activist initiative, but then we realized that we were very good at developing products. So we decided that we could add value to customers and make a sustainable business out of it. After pivoting a couple of times, we became what we are now, Kuorum, which is the name of the startup. Kuorum is a software as a service to digitize assemblies, shareholder meetings, and elections in the private sector.
And those initial journeys, so you spoke about pivoting. What were some of those significant lessons that you learned during that time that are still present today with regards to how you've shaped your entrepreneurship journey?
That's a very good question. So, when one of the difference, I think, we will talk later about Black founders and how we start startups. And I think one of the difference with the rest of entrepreneurs is that normally you have this very successful entrepreneur that analyzes a market, then looks for a problem that is not solved in the market. I wish somebody would have told me that at that time, because I was just passionate about the idea of using technology to foster democracy. So I didn't pay attention to the market, didn't pay attention to the value proposition, differentiation, competitors. We did wrong basically everything you can do wrong when you start a business. But we had the passion. And this is really important because it helps you overcome any problem that comes in the way. So in the beginning, we did like Tinder for politics, where you voted for bills that were being discussed in parliament. And then we match you with the MP that was voting the same things that you voted. No business plan, no value proposition, nothing. But we were very good at acquiring users. So we got 1,000 users in 1 week. We thought it was normal. Then we realized it's not normal to get so many users in only 1 week. So this is when we realized we were good at product development, which is one of the main, I think, when you do the SWOT analysis, one of the main strengths of the team right now. We're very good at developing products. So the journey has been complicated because we, thanks to accelerators, contacts to other entrepreneurs, and this is also where Google Black Founders Farms, we will talk about it later, is also an important contributor to this business. We realize how things should be done, and this is when we started over again. But we pivoted from an activist initiative to a service for NGOs. So we helped NGOs to do lobby online. We got UNICEF and Save the Children to take bills to the Spanish Parliament through our app, but nobody paid for that. Then we did a tool for political campaigns. It was the time of Brexit in the UK. So we were competing with an American startup called Nation Builder, which was much more advanced when it comes to technology than us. So they won that race. They basically did almost every website, and every village had a website, or every city council had a website, pro or anti-Brexit. And they did all of them. So then we were about to close, and we got some crazy guys to be our angel investors. When I think of that time, I wouldn't have invested in us, but they did. They were crazy enough to do it, and we're very grateful for that. And then we did the pivot to build this kind of websites, they have in city councils to do consultations to their citizen engagement. And then COVID came, and we already had a technology that was quite good for these consultations. But we saw that in the private sector, union elections, shareholder meetings, assemblies of sport clubs and associations couldn't take place because of COVID. So this is when we started this last pivot. And now is when we are starting to see growth.
Which is good. So you spoke on the notion of your first few variations of the company were competing with other companies as well. So currently, how does Kuorum differentiate itself from its competitors within the market that you're currently occupying?
Okay, this is it's actually a niche market. It's a small market. I think it's 290 billion, American billion. Here in Spain, we say billion for what Americans say trillion. So it's really difficult for me to switch my mind. But it's 293 billion. So it's not a big market, but the problem is huge. The problem is huge because cybersecurity, making sure that the vote is traceable and secret at the same time, this is really complex when it comes to technology and to the kind of cryptography you apply. So there's like 100 players in this market, but actually we compete with 20 because the rest of them are either very small or not businesses, not professional. So it's a very small market, but not very crowded. And there's not a clear leader in this market. This market comes from elections, presidential elections, because, we talk about electronic voting and we directly think in presidential elections, but actually there is only one country that does the whole process from voter registration until the final audit online. And this country is Estonia. Countries like Brazil, the United States, even Spain have tried electronic voting systems, but they only cover the part of vote casting and vote counting. You cannot identify yourself online. So this industry comes from a past where you build a machine and you put it in the polling station and people can click what they vote for. So this is the history of the market. But right now there are a bunch of startups trying to digitize the whole process. And since you cannot digitize the whole process for presidential elections, because legally you cannot do it, what we do is we work for the private sector. So to answering to your question, the unique selling proposition of Kuorum in that market is that we are the only provider that has end-to-end verifiability. If you want, we can talk about it later. It's technical, but it's fun. End-to-end verifiability, which means that even if you have the worst case scenario disaster and a hacker destroys the whole system, they won't be able to see what you voted for. So this is like the minimum. Certifications in cybersecurity like ISO 27001 and National Security Scheme, which is even more demanding than ISO 27001. So I would say security and usability. This is the differentiation in the market for us.
Yeah. So the notion of election democracy. So traditionally, all of us, we know when elections come around, democratic voting, it's the notion of you go to a place, you place your vote, and you do that physically. So how are platforms like Quorum reshaping this telematic voting process in terms of removing voting from the traditional sense and making it more accessible to everyone else? Let's say people that are immobile, that cannot move around. How does that process change now where if it becomes more available online? Perfect example is during COVID, the USA had one of the biggest elections and they applied mail-in voting, which kind of reshaped the notion of more people could vote because the people that couldn't go to certain places, they could now get mails. So how does, if you implement, like you spoke about Estonia, they implemented a full-on countrywide digitalization of the voting system. How can more countries benefit from forming those systems?
That's a very good question. Actually, what happens in Estonia is that it's a very small country, 500,000, I think, population. And it's the sandbox for the European Union when it comes to electronic identification. Electronic identification is a small part of the whole process of voting online, but it's a very important one. In Europe, we have the European Regulation for Electronic Identification, EIDAS, which is common for the countries in the European Union. And they are preparing now the evolution of that regulation. And this evolution of the regulation is based on experiences in Estonia. In Estonia, they have the possibility to have their ID in here, in their mobile phones. So we will have that in the near future in other countries in Europe. You will have your ID in your mobile phone. This allows you to do many things. One of the important things it allows you to do is to share some attributes of your ID without giving away all the information. For example, if you are at the door of a club and you need to go in, you need to demonstrate that you are over 18. The only thing you need to do is put your fingerprint in the mobile phone, put it in a machine, and demonstrate you are over 18 without the guy at the door looking at your name, your father's name, your address. So there will be a big revolution in electronic identification. How it works in Estonia, from the voter registration. So when you want to, for example, in countries like the UK, you need to register to vote and you need to go there. And there's a big problem with young people and young people in disadvantaged neighborhoods to go to register to vote. So when this change is going to be easier for them to register because they will do it online. The new regulation in electronic identification in Europe will allow you to register in a video call like this. You will have a video call with the police. They will verify that this is you and they will generate documents or register you for to vote online. This is the first step, voter registration. Then there's something in the private sector that you won't find in the public sector, which is early vote or proxy vote. For assemblies, we work, for example, for sports clubs. Football Club Barcelona did their elections for the World Fan Federation with us. And you can vote early or you can delegate your vote to another person. And you can do that online. Then when it comes to assemblies, for example, of NGOs like the Red Cross, also a customer of us, then you need to manage the access to people to the venue. So you can do access management. They will receive a QR. We will scan the QR. We'll know they are there. If they want to attend online, when they click in the button, we will know they are there. This helps us to calculate quorum automatically. Quorum calculation. This is another big pain for our customers. How to do automatic quorum calculation. And then when the time to vote come, they can identify themselves through the technology. It's like access it to your bank account, a double factor authentication, and then you cast your vote. So it's the whole process.
So in that sense, one of the biggest things about voting is anonymity. the identity for you to have the freedom to go cast your vote so no one knows. I think one of the biggest fears with online voting, as you mentioned before, is the notion of hacking. That, oh, what if my identity gets stolen? What if my vote gets leaked online? How do you reinforce this notion of anonymity when it comes to telemarketing voting, and how does Quorum kind of deal with that specifically?
This is also a very good question, and you got the point. Anonymity is the key, because in any other aspect, voting online is just like making a financial transaction online. So let's imagine that that I owe you 50 euros and I need to do a bank transfer to you. The conditions for that bank transfer are confidentiality, integrity, availability, authenticity, and traceability. Those 5 conditions, let's explain them very quickly. Confidentiality means only you, me, and our banks will know these transfers took place. Integrity means if I transfer 50 euros, you won't receive 60 or 40. You will receive exactly 50. Then you have availability. The system must be available for me to do the transfer. Authenticity means we must make sure it's me doing the transaction and not somebody who stole my mobile phone. And then you have traceability, which means in case of a dispute, you, for example, say, I didn't get the money. There's a possibility for the banks to check what happened in every step in the way. So these 5 conditions. Now let's imagine you are responsible for the ballot box and I'm going to vote online. The 5 conditions are the same. So confidentiality, I will use an envelope to send my vote so that only me and you know what I voted for. This is without anonymity, okay? This is only confidentiality. Yeah. Nobody else knows, but you know because you are responsible for the ballot box. Then you have integrity. Ballots should be the same I said. Then you have availability. You must be available for me to cast my vote. Then you have authenticity, and this is where electronic identification and electronic identification regulations are important. And then you have traceability. There should be the possibility for an auditor to come and see that everything was done correctly. So the only problem here is anonymity. Yeah. If I keep confidential my vote with an envelope, but you know what I voted for, and it's traceable, so an auditor also knows what I voted for. How do we work with that? If we would be in the offline world, it would be very easy. Ballot box. You use a ballot box so that I put my envelope in the ballot box and you mix it. And when you open the ballot box, you won't be able to know which one was my vote. So this ballot box in the electronic voting is cryptography. We encrypt your vote in your device. So even if you have a man in the middle, because this is encrypted with homomorphic cryptography, even if you have a man in the middle, he can destroy my system, but he cannot know what I voted for. And then you will ask, how can I count your vote? And this is the homomorphic property of cryptography. Homomorphic property is explained as you have an alphanumeric chain, and you can sum alphanumeric chains without knowing what's in those chains. So you can count all the votes without knowing what I voted for. And therefore it's traceable, it's confidential, it's secret, and still you can sum and you can count all the votes.
And with that sense, is this when let's say blockchain plays a role in increasing the anonymity and security of those votes, because it allows you to cast the votes without it being traceable or anyone having access to it? Is this where a second layer of protection is applied to the vote as well?
Yeah, actually, this is what we call security by design. So there is 2 kinds of security. I can build a castle and protect myself from the enemy because I have, a treasure within that castle. But I can also take the treasure and put it somewhere else. So this is what we do. We take the treasure, we put it somewhere else, so it's secure by design. I have my defenses, but even if the enemy comes and attacks me, they won't find the treasure. So this is a homomorphic cryptography and some other technologies that we use, like zero knowledge proofs, zero trust architecture. Some of the technologies that we use are to protect the system, but cryptography is not to protect the system, it's security by design. Even if you break all my defenses, you won't know what people voted for. And this is also a big difference, sorry to interrupt, with other providers. Because you were asking about the difference, the unique selling proposition. This is the unique selling proposition of our technology and maybe 4 or 5 more providers in the world.
I think that's the biggest issue when it comes to online voting. Even when you are given if you work for a company, they tell you, oh, there's a survey, it's anonymous, and people feel like, how anonymous is it? Well, you don't know, because they will ask you, oh, it's connected to your email, but that means you know who I am. And so I think that issue always prevails when it comes to people being, I would like to apply this system, but will they not know it's me? So
Yeah.
I think if that can be explained to people and people can be like, oh no, my vote is secure, my identity is secure, it kind of changes the conversation of applying systems like this more and more. Because I think in the States, the biggest issue with mailing voting was you can do it, but at the same time, there's so much logistics that goes to applying a system like that, because you are using more paper, you're using petrol, cars have to drive, things have to be dropped around. So it's not sustainable. So that's the other thing when we touch on the sustainability aspect of telemarketing voting. How does that change the ecosystem? As you mentioned, your biggest goal at the beginning was looking at climate change and trying to solve the solution. How does this process contribute to the conversation of climate change?
Yeah, actually, this is another differentiation of our product. We are the only provider that measures the impact in terms of CO2 emissions, because we measure the distance between the voter and the ballot box or the polling station to see how much CO2 we saved. But one of our missions or theory of change is that by enhancing democracy in private democratic processes, we are actually fostering democratic values in the society as a whole. Therefore, the more impact we have in our customers, the more impact we will have in society. And one of the things that is in our mission is to evangelize, to explain these things, so that people know that electronic voting is already prepared to do elections in the public sector, and that slowly we move towards that scenario where we don't need to use paper anymore. Another important thing is that electronic voting won't be a substitute of offline voting. This is a fear that many people have. Offline voting will continue to exist because there are people who is not used to deal with technology, because you need to have that. But online voting is going to substitute per post voting. When you vote per post, what you do is you use 3 envelopes. 1 envelope for your voting option, 1 envelope for your personal data, and then you take the 3rd envelope and you put those 2 envelopes together within that 3rd envelope. So you trust that the post company or the post provider is not going to lose your vote and is not going to open the 2 envelopes at the same time. Therefore, you need to trust in that central authority, which is good. It has been good for hundreds of years. But now you have a technology where you don't need to trust anyone, because by design, your vote is secret. So this evangelizing people about how electronic voting is more secure than per post voting is part of our mission.
Yeah. And so I just want to move the conversation to what we spoke about at the beginning in the notion of community building, and as a Black founder, and within Spain, with the intersections of identities like Afro-Latin, Afro-Caribbean, Afropean, how has that kind of shaped your entrepreneurship journey as well within Spain as a Black founder? What were some of the challenges that you had to go through that you would see your other peers that are not in sense of Black, that you have to go through most steps? And then how was that initial journey for you?
Okay, I think a good way to illustrate that is with an example. The biggest startup event in Spain is South Summit. It takes place in Madrid. If you go to South Summit, you will find a huge hangar with 17,000 people. So it's a huge event. But if you walk through the venue, you will only find 10, 15 Black people. And I'm sure only 5 of them, including me, are Spanish. So that means the proportion of Black people in the biggest startup events in Spain, as compared to the proportion of Black people living in Spain, is around 40 times less. Why is that? I think in Spain, the stage at which we are at the moment is a stage of denial that there is a problem. And after putting a lot of thought on why that happens, I think the reason is how we deal with racism in Europe, at least in the UK and Spain. we don't like to talk about races because races doesn't exist. And I agree with that. Race is an invention, a human invention with no scientific basis. So race doesn't exist. So we shouldn't take it into account. The problem with that approach is during centuries, there's been discrimination based on race.
Yeah.
So if you look away, if you don't want to see the problem, discrimination will persist. And I like the way they see it or the approach of the USA, where they also have a history of 400 years of slavery, discrimination, and injustice. But they decided to do the contrary. Ethnicity is measured at all times. If you apply for a visa, they ask for your ethnicity. If you apply for a job, even if it's a private corporation, they ask for your ethnicity. Why they do that? Because this is the only way to measure if in certain sectors like health, education, access to university studies, this discrimination persists. So I think my proposal is both approaches can be combined. You shouldn't take race into account in interpersonal relations because it doesn't matter. It doesn't exist. But when it comes to groups, if you want to be fair with our history, you need to measure ethnicity as much as you can. So, for example, in the South Summit, how many Black people did come to the event? We need to make something so that more Black people come next year. And actually, this is happening because 2 years ago, I think it was only me, the only black person in the event, or two more. So the thing is, there are changes, but until we don't switch our minds to do this kind of measure, the problem will persist.
Yeah, and in that sense, how are programs like the startup for Google for founders, for Black founders, how are those initiatives kind of shifting the conversation around programs being created that are catered to more of the Black individuals within the European ecosystem? How important are programs like that within the European ecosystem?
The impact is really really huge. Google Black Founders Fund has invested 2.5 billion in African and European Black-led tech startups. Those startups have raised collectively 379 million. Those startups provide employment to 6,000 people. And on average, the performance of those startups is 61% higher than other startups in the same stage in a period of 3 years. So the impact is huge, also in Spain. But the thing is, here I always get the comment that, why does Google invest in Black startups? This is unfair. But this is because of that vision that we talked about. So we need to switch our minds. It's unfair that you have 14% in the US, 14% of Black people. In Spain is 1.4% of Black people. But you only have less than 1% of VC investment to Black-led startups in the US. And in Spain, you only have 10 Black people attending to the South Summit. So the problem is that this reality exists and we need to switch our minds. But the impact is great. Another thing I've heard is that Google Black Founders Fund is charity, but it's not charity. It's really difficult to go into the program. Only 5% of the startups that apply get into the program. So that means that you have top-notch entrepreneurs and startups in that program. And I met you in Amsterdam. You were with the group, and you can see they're like crazy. I don't know why I'm there really, because they are great. They are really, as I said, top-notch entrepreneurs. So it's not charity. It's providing support to those who will make the most of it, and to those that traditionally have been not discriminated, but not taken into account by traditional VCs.
Yeah. And the next one of traditional VCs, how do we, as the Black community, how do we break this mold of being confident or forcing ourselves into those spaces like the summit that's held in Spain? How do we, because I think the Black community, to some degree, we feel, oh no, we don't belong in those spaces sometimes. But how do we break that notion of feeling excluded or feeling we need to do way more than we need to kind of belong this, even though we was, I think one of the things that I enjoyed when I was in Amsterdam, when I saw the Black founders there and the things you guys are doing, I'm like, why am I only learning about this or finding out about you guys in those spaces when I've been around Europe trying to find Black founders but there's a limited visibility around the Black community within, this is what we're doing, this is what happened. But you have to really look for it. How can that mold shift?
So before answering your question, the first thing is that you don't need to be a VC investable startup. Because this happens not only to Black founders, to any founder. It's like they're crazy to get VC money, VC funding, because they want to grow fast and they want to be the next unicorn. You don't need to be the next unicorn. You can be a very profitable startup without VC funding. This is the first thing. You don't need VC funding. But if you have a Black entrepreneur that really has a business that is investable by VCs, but he or she doesn't get the money, the thing is that you need benchmarks. And you need reference. And this is why quotas are so important. Because here in Spain, I think Amuda Goeli is the founder of Destinia, which is the Spanish booking.com, with a revenue of 235 million. This is the only Black founder I know in Spain. There's another one that is an investor now in the US. But it's really difficult to know those stories. Consequence is that you don't imagine yourself as a founder, because you don't have a reference in your community. And if you look at the numbers, I have the numbers in the US because they measure it. I don't have the numbers in Europe. But in US, 14% of the population is Black, but only less than 5% of the population, of the Black population, is owner of a business. And it's because you don't think this is a possibility for you, because you don't see it in your community. So therefore, I think having benchmarks, programs like Google Black Founders Fund are really important for other Black people to see themselves as entrepreneurs. And then I also think we should look at why are we different? For example, and this is also related to maybe I don't need VC funding. I don't know if you were raised with the tail of the hare and the tortoise.
Yeah.
It's an African, in Spanish we say fabula. It's an African tale that is famous, but we have many tales of the tortoise, where being slow and thinking and taking your time to look at things, it's an asset. But in the VC world, you need to go fast and you need to burn money and you need to grow 3 times, 5 times every year. But maybe this is not the way for many Black founders. I don't know. If they want to do it, they need reference, they need benchmarks, but also think of how are we different from the rest of entrepreneurs. For example, in our case, electronic voting is a business where you need to go slow because cybersecurity is so important. If you have a mistake with one client, then the business is over. So what we do is we spend a lot of time doing QA testing, doing penetration tests, developing the architecture, the cybersecurity architecture of the startup. I think, well, maybe this is a stupid idea, but I think this is related to the fact that I'm a Black founder and I like to take my time to look at things. If I would go fast, I would have one of those low cost products that they have their bugs, they have their security breaches, but still they go into the market really fast. So look at our specialty, at how we are different from the rest is also important.
So you spoke at your beginning. How important would it have been to have mentors, and how important is for individuals like yourself to be mentors to the next generation of Black entrepreneurs that are coming into
Yeah, this is very important. Even if I don't care, Black, white, whatever, having mentors is always very important and having good mentors. Good mentors are people who have gone through what you're going now, and they cannot tell you what to do, but they can tell you what not to do. And this has been very, very important in our path. And this is also one of the good things of Google Black Founders Funds, to have the possibility to talk to other entrepreneurs who are in more advanced stages, also to entrepreneurs who are beginning and where you can add value to them. This is really important for any founder.
Which is true. So as we reach the end of our conversation, I just wanted to, how do you foresee telemarketing voting changing in the coming years? I know you spoke about how Europe is kind of putting up systems to build a system that caters to online voting on a global scale. How do you foresee that happening within the next few years?
I think, well, if you look at the market analysis, they say that the size of the market is going to double until 2030. But I think we have an opportunity to even grow faster. I don't foresee electronic voting happening in the public sector rather than Estonia or maybe one or two countries more in the next 10 to 10 years. Because it's not only the culture of thinking that electronic voting is not secure enough, which is wrong, but it's not only overcoming that cultural thing. It's also that electronic voting would change the electoral scenario in many countries. Imagine that in the UK, every young guy of marginate neighbor decide to vote. So things would change dramatically, and they are afraid of that. Politicians are afraid of that. So it's really difficult that they have the majorities to change legislation. So I don't foresee that. But what I foresee is electronic voting happening in the private sector much more, because we can cut costs of organizing these kind of events by 70%. We can cut the time dedicated to organizing these events by 60%. And we make the life of event organizers much easier and much less stressful. So I foresee electronic voting happening much more in general assemblies, shareholder meetings, and elections in the private sector. When it comes to technology, I think cybersecurity and the application of artificial intelligence in cybersecurity will be decisive for the technology. But in terms of applying it to the public sector, I don't think it's happening in the near future.
And in that sense, like what advice would you give to inspiring entrepreneurs that are in the early stages or thinking about diving into entrepreneurship? What would you have given yourself, like at the beginning stages of like, oh, this is what you need to do. This is what you need to prepare for. This would be the struggles you will have to go through if you dive into this journey.
Well, there's a TV show. Well, TV show. It's in one platform. I don't remember if HBO or Netflix. It's called The Playlist. Is the story Spotify. I think this is a really interesting way of tackling entrepreneurship, because they see the startup as investors see it. And I think this is good in some cases to look at the market first. Because if you look at the market first and you find the market that is big enough, you will have more financial chances to succeed. Because even if you build a product that is not very appropriate for the problem you are trying to solve, you will find somebody who would like it and would pay for it. Whereas if you go to a very small market, your chances to succeed are much less. So this is something I would have appreciated somebody to tell me in the beginning. Look for big markets. Mm-hmm. And I would recommend just to watch the show and see how they think. I think this is a very good learning.
Okay. So looking for big markets, I think as one founder I spoke to was like, when you start with your business plan, think niche and small first. So you know your target audience to begin with. So would you think a shifting more of like, look at the market and see where your product fits in within that market would be more a better approach, or just look at the market to the begin when you start rather than start with the product as well?
There, I can see you are experienced. This is both are, no, really, both are compatible. And this is something, it's a very interesting conversation I also had with some friends in the Black Founders Fund. Both are compatible. You should look at big markets. For example, Airbnb was doing it in the cereal market. They were selling cereals. So if you are an investor and you see two guys selling cereals with the face of Obama and McCain, would you invest in that? But that business became Airbnb. So in early stages, you are finding product market fit. And in order to find product market fit, it's much better to find a niche, because this niche will only need 2 to 3 key features, which will be for them, which will be the best, and you will develop them really fast. But you should have a vision for the long run, and the vision for the long run, this is where you should look for a big market. For example, sports is I think is 1 trillion market. But the things you can do in sports are so different. Music is if you take into account live music and and recorded music is around 70 billion. I'm again mixing up Spanish and American. 70 billion. It's a huge market, but the kind of things you can do within the music space, very diverse.
Yeah, totally.
So I would say, look for a big market and then pick a niche and work for the niche and do things that are not scale. Do consultancy. Go door by door. Don't use electronic marketing, online marketing. Go door by door. Do interviews to your customers until you find the problem that is the first priority for one very small niche of clients. Then solve that problem and then think of the next phase of your startup. But always within a market that you know that you're going to have possibilities to pivot and to change the product.
Well, once again, thank you for your time. That's because that's kind of it from us from the episodes. Look us up with the next episode. Once again, thank you for your time, Matias. Enjoyed the conversation so much. It was nice to have you.
We should do this weekly.
It was quite nice having you on the show and chatting.